Okay, we'll be discussing a topic today, which is irrigation and drainage system. It's an interesting topic. Just pay attention to the details. Now, water is the most important determinant in the growth of crops. And to ensure that crop production is done all year round, there must be a way water is made available to the soil to supplement insufficient rainfall. On the other hand, excess water in the soil can actually constitute negative effects on the soil. And so, for effective crop production, there should be a way of removing excess water from the soil. So in this topic, we will be talking about irrigation. And by the end of the lesson, we'll be talking about irrigation and drainage. So by the end of the lesson, you should be able to define irrigation system, list and explain the various types of irrigation systems. You should be able to enumerate the advantages and disadvantages of each type of irrigation system. You should also be able to highlight the importance of irrigation. You should also be able to discuss the problems of irrigation in Nigeria. You should be able to define drainage. You should be able to state and discuss the various types of drainage systems in Nigeria. You should be able to describe the advantages and disadvantages of each type of drainage system. You should also be able to discuss the importance of drainage. And finally, you should be able to pinpoint the problems of drainage in Nigeria. So let's start with irrigation. What is irrigation? Irrigation is the artificial application of water to the soil to supplement insufficient rainfall. So it's done when there's insufficient rainfall, and it can also be defined as the artificial watering of land to foster plant growth. Let's look at the types of irrigation systems. We have three main classes of irrigation system. We have the surface irrigation, the subsurface irrigation, and the overhead irrigation. Now let's start with surface irrigation. Now in this system, water from rivers, dams, or streams flows along the surface of the land to farmland. So you need to take note of that word, flowing along the surface of the land to the farmland. Now this can be in the form of channels, flooding, contour ditch, furrow, basin, and border dikes. Now these forms can also be referred to as the various types of surface irrigation. So now let's look at these various types of surface irrigation. Here we have channels, as I mentioned earlier. Now in this surface irrigation system, a long gutter is dug across the farm and water is made to run through, thereby supplying water to the nearby farmland, as you can see in the picture. We have flooding. This is another type of surface irrigation. Now water is made to flow from a source onto the farmland, covering the entire farm, and the farm eventually becomes flooded. Now this system is ideal for rice production. We have contour ditch, which is another system of surface irrigation. Now they said a long narrow excavation or ditch, you can see it, is dug in the farm in circular curves. Look at the circular curves here. See the circular curves? These are circular curves. These circular curves can also be called contours. Now, and water runs through these contours, supplying it to the farm. You can see the water running through the contours. You can see the water running through the contours, thereby supplying water to the farmland. Furrow irrigation, which is furrow, is a type of surface irrigation. Now it's a method where water is applied to furrows using small discharges to favor water infiltration while advancing down the field. So a furrow is a small parallel channel made to carry water in order to irrigate crops. So this is a furrow. You can see, say, water is flowing through. Still on surface irrigation, we have basin irrigation. Now this is irrigation of land by surrounding it with embankments to form a basin and flooding it with water. These are embankments. You can see the embankments here. These are the embankments. So this forms like a basin. I'm sure we know what a basin is. and thereby flooding it with water. So this is called basin irrigation. It's one of the oldest methods of irrigation and is widely practiced where rice is irrigated. Now let's look at the advantages and disadvantages of surface irrigation. For the advantages, it is cheap to establish, water is evenly spread on the farmland, and water is readily available for the crops. But it also has its disadvantages. It cannot be practiced where the land is hilly. It cannot be successful in sandy soil. So the surface irrigation is not, because of the rate of percolation. Sandy soil has large pore spaces, and so the rate of percolation is very high, so you cannot carry out this type of surface irrigation where we have sandy soils. And the volume of water, especially in flooding, can be difficult to control in some cases, and some crops may not be tolerant to heavy flooding. Now let's look at subsurface irrigation. Now in this system, water is applied below the surface using perforated pipes. You can see from the picture, this is a pipe that is put below the surface of the soil, and you can see the perforation here. Okay, it has its advantages and disadvantages, so let's take a look at them. For the advantages, it is ideal for soil with low water retention capacities. There are soils that cannot retain water easily. You can use subsurface irrigation. There's also reduction in evaporation because there's no direct effect of sunlight on the water, because the water is being administered below the surface of the soil. Then the roots of different depths are supplied with water, and there's usually no flooding. But for the disadvantages, we have salt water, which is from the sea and ocean. It's not ideal for subsurface irrigation because, of course, it would have caused some corrosive effect on the materials. Then installation and maintenance practices are expensive, and it also requires high technical knowledge. Let's look at overhead irrigation, starting with the meaning. Now, overhead irrigation is a system whereby water is supplied to the farmland above the surface of the soil. Remember, for surface irrigation, water is applied to the soil along the surface of the soil, the farmland. When it comes to overhead irrigation, water is applied to the farmland above the surface. So that's the difference. So one is along, that's for surface irrigation, while overhead irrigation is you use the word above the surface of the soil. Now there are two types here. We have the sprinkler irrigation and the drip irrigation. Now let's take a look at the sprinkler irrigation. In this system, water is sprayed from the air and allowed to fall on the soil surface somehow as rainfall through nozzles or emitters under high pressure. So you can see from the picture how that takes place. This is sprinkler irrigation. See the nozzles or emitters, and it's allowed sprayed into the air, and it falls down as rain, in the form of rain, not as rain, but the form of rain. Then we have the drip irrigation, which is also known as the trickle irrigation. Now in this system, water is discharged through emitters at selected spacing to deliver water to the soil surface near the base of the plant. So you can see this is the pipe, and you can see water is discharged from it. Look at the drop of water here. It's called drip. When something is dripping, it's falling at a slow pace, at a small volume. So you can see dripping into just at the base of the plant. This is called drip irrigation or trickle irrigation. Now it has its advantages and disadvantages. Let's take a look at the advantages and the disadvantages of this overhead irrigation. Generally, remember, we have the sprinkler system and the drip or trickle system. So for the generally, we're looking at the advantages of both the sprinkler irrigation and the drip irrigation. For the advantages, there's economic use of water. Water is economically used. That means there's no wastage of water. It also reduces salt concentration in the root zones, especially if the source of water has salt content in it. So because there's a control of water applied to the farmland, it will help to reduce the concentration of salt to the root zones. Then certain fertilizers can also be applied through this method and that process is called fertigation. Now, it's ideal in a nursery. Of course, a nursery is just a small structure that you use to rear, to grow crops that are delicate. And so at that point, you do not need so much force when you're talking about application of water. So you can use the irrigation system, this overhead irrigation, to apply water to the nursery. Then it's very ideal in arid and semi-arid areas. That's areas with very low rainfall. So you can use this method. But let's look at the disadvantage. One, it's expensive to establish. Maintenance and repair is also high. The cost of maintenance and repair is high. And seawater is not ideal. Slopy landscape is also not suitable. Now, a stable water supply is also required. So these are some of the disadvantages of overhead irrigation. Now, let's generally look at the importance of irrigation generally. It makes early planting possible. So with irrigation, if there's a delay in rainfall, that's rain-fed agriculture. When you depend on rainfall for your rain of your crops, it's called rain-fed agriculture. When there's a delay, it could actually affect early planting. But with irrigation, you're able to carry out early planting. It adds water to the soil, which helps to dissolve nutrients. It also softens the soils for easy tillage, that's the breakage of the soil into clods or lumps. Then it also helps to increase the yield of crops because water is adequately supplied, which is very necessary for crop growth. And crops can also survive during droughts, that's period when there's no rainfall. Farmers are less dependent on rainfall as a result of irrigation. It can also help to cool the soil, making it ideal for cropping. It also helps to stabilize the farm economy. Remember, when there's high yield, good production, the economic state of the farm is also stabilized. The financial state of the farmer is established. Farmers are more secure from weather conditions. That means when there's drought or insufficient rainfall, they will have nothing to fear because they have an alternative means of growing their crops. Then greater varieties of crops can also be raised. Now let's look at the problems associated with irrigation. It also has its problems. So let's take a look at the problems. Pests and disease may build up. You know, when you're irrigating a farmland and probably the other farmlands around there that are not irrigated, so those pests, they're living things. Diseases are caused by pathogens that survive on water. And so once that environment is conducive for them, before you know it, they will be able to migrate into such irrigated lands and now start invading such lands. So there's pest and disease buildup. The source of water is usually seasonal because even though, yes, we can talk about application of water artificially, there has to be a source of water, which is still gotten through rainfall. Because when there's rainfall, we have our water bodies being available. Even the underground water is also made available. But there could be challenges from that angle. So source of water is usually seasonal. Then there's a high cost of equipment. Establishing these irrigation facilities or equipments are expensive. Installation is also expensive. As purchase of the equipment is expensive. Installing it is expensive. Maintaining it, that's in terms of servicing these equipment, is also requires skilled men, which may not be available. Then good soil sometimes are converted to waterlogged soils, especially when there's no controlled, especially with surface irrigation. We're talking about flooding. This could lead to waterlogging. Then it could also lead to pollution if it contains dangerous chemicals. And this irrigation equipment could also disturb the free movement of machineries, especially for surface irrigation and overhead irrigation. Let's go to drainage system now. Let's talk about drainage. What is drainage? This is the artificial removal of excess water from farmlands to prevent waterlogging and to also promote good farming practices. Now let's look at the importance of drainage system. Now it prevents waterlogging in the soil, which has to do with excess water in the soil. Drainage can help to prevent waterlogging. It also helps in soil aeration. Now, of course, when there's a lot of water, the free movement of air is also affected. So drainage can help to improve aeration. Then the temperature of the soil is also improved. And leaching of excess salt is also enhanced by drainage because, of course, drainage has to do with the removal of water, excess water, and salts are also removed alongside. Then the rate of seed germination is also increased because when there's excess water, it could also affect the germination of seeds. So drainage helps to improve the rate of seed germination. It also decreases soil erosion as well, helps to improve soil structure and also reduce soil acidity. Now let's look at the types of drainage. We have surface drainage and subsurface drainage. Now let's start with surface drainage. Now this involves the orderly removal of excess water artificially from the surface of the land using constructed open ditches, field drains, and land grading. What are the advantages of surface drainage? It's easy to construct, it is cheap, very ideal in tight, impermeable soils. You know, soils that do not encourage the downward movement of water. So such soils can be ideal for drainage. Then it prevents stagnant water. Now, what are the disadvantages of surface drainage? It disturbs the movement of machines too, like tractors, can act as a breeding place for some pests. Now, these open ditches that are dug as a means of drainage can also be prone to gullies. Okay, it also requires frequent maintenance, that the soil structure is not damaged, and these drainage facilities also need to be maintained. It also occupies large areas of land, and it makes the farm open to hazards. Once could fall into an open ditch. So let's look at subsurface drainage. Sub means below the soil. When we talk about sub, it means below the soil surface. Now this is the orderly removal of excess water from the land using tiles or molds or perforated pipes, as we can see here, dug under the ground. Now it has its advantages, so let's look at the advantages of subsurface drainage. Here it does not disturb the movement of farm machines because it's placed below the soil surface. High value crops can be grown. The field is free from surface obstructions. The soil becomes permeable. Then the soil is hard, hence drainage pipes cannot be damaged. But it has its disadvantages, so let's take a look at the disadvantages. One, it is expensive to establish. That digging and putting such pipes below tiles or molds below the soil surface is an expensive process. The maintenance is tedious. If there's a problem with the pipes that are below the surface, there means another excavation has to take place in order to get access or gain access to the pipes to correct whatever fault may have developed. Skilled personnel is also required in order to install this drainage systems, and it's very deep. It needs deep excavation of the soil. So let's look at the problems of drainage systems. Of course, it is expensive to establish and maintain. Acidity may increase around reservoirs. Pests and disease may also build up around reservoirs. Farmland with high water table may not need drainage, and it reduces the value of farmland because of the excavations that you carry out in it. Okay, so let's just have a recap on what we've learned so far. We talked about irrigation and drainage, and we said the meaning of irrigation and drainage. Irrigation is the artificial application of water to the soil or to farmland, while drainage is the removal of excess water artificially from farmland. We also talked about the types of irrigation, where we talked about surface irrigation, subsurface irrigation, and overhead irrigation. We looked at types of drainage, where we talked about surface drainage and subsurface drainage. We also looked at some of the advantages and disadvantages of irrigation and drainage, and also mentioned some problems with irrigation and drainage. So thank you for your time. Let's just take a look at some questions in order to test our knowledge of understanding. So here, the first question says, irrigation can be described as A, reduction of soil water, B, spraying of minerals on plants, C, application of dissolved fertilizers to soil, D, application of water to soil. Now, it cannot be reduction because that has to do with drainage. Spraying of minerals on plants is not irrigation. Application of dissolved fertilizers, which is fertigation, is still not irrigation. Though it can be carried out through irrigation, but the correct definition is, or the correct description is, application of water to soil. Now, the next question says, which of the following conditions is a characteristics of poorly drained soils? The first option is presence of large number of termites. Nope, that's not the correct answer. Presence of high amount of humus is also not a characteristic of poorly drained soil. Decrease in the activities of microorganisms. And we have high soil fertility and productivity. That's not a characteristic of poorly drained soil. When the soil is poorly drained, the activities of microorganisms are affected because we should understand that with such a situation, an anaerobic environment is created where there's loss or low level of oxygen, and microorganisms need this oxygen to survive. And that is when we have a poorly drained soil, which means the soil is waterlogged, we have activities of microorganisms affected. So the answer is C. So thank you for your time. I advise you to expose yourself to more questions so that you can test your and evaluate yourself on your knowledge base concerning this topic. Thank you.